Back in 2021, Harley Davidson discontinued their line of 1200 and 883 Sportsters, the Sportsters as we know it. These were simple, characterful, aggressive styled bikes. The 883 Sportster was relatively affordable and it came in at the same price as a Triumph Bonneville T100. These were never bikes that were going to win awards for dynamism and performance, but people loved the character of them, and that's why they turned into a sales phenomenon. And if Harley Davidson's recent sales figures are anything to go by, the new Sportster 1200, the thoroughly modern, sporty Sportster, has not filled the gap left by these bikes. It's a simple task in theory, making a cool mid-size cruiser. You need in equal parts character, style and aggression. These points come very much trumping, or very much before the likes of the performance and the dynamism of the bike. People must have the style over anything else. The problem is, in the past 2 to 3 years, people looking for a classically styled mid-size cruiser haven't had anywhere to put their money. And that's why if you would have bought a 2020 Sportster, the chances are you won't have lost any more than £1,000. So if you're looking at the adventure bike market and you're looking at a new BMW GS, always the performance and dynamism, the spec sheets, the top trump figures will always be first in your mind. You'll take a bike that doesn't look quite as good if it's got all of the points that you're looking for, if it's market leading in horsepower and dynamism. You can sacrifice the looks, but it doesn't work like that in the cruiser market. And so far, in the 2 to 3 years since Harley Davidson discontinued that Sportster with the 36-year-old Evo engine, no one has managed to crack the mid-size, classically styled cruiser market. Very possibly until now. 2023, Royal Enfield came out with the Super Meteor 650. It's 46 horsepower, 241 kilos, and it can be yours for £6,800. Well, that all sounds about right. And if I look a bit closer, I can see this is a Harris engineering frame. Harris are famous for frame making excellence, dynamic frames. And these are Showa upside down forks. These are signs that this is a bike that may well handle well. Look even closer, and that is a built-in tripper navigation system. So they've got modern touches where needed. And if I go down to the bottom of the bike, this is unusual for a cruiser. I'll try and do this in the mud. There is a center stand, meaning that I can work on the bike myself, and if I ever do break down, I'll be able to fix the bike at the side of the road. Although, chances are I won't be breaking down because that is the Interceptor engine, and that has a very deserved reputation of ruggedness and reliability. Looking at the overall silhouette of the bike as well, the way it sits, the way it stands, it is a stunningly good looking bike. Beautifully proportioned, classic lines, great ergonomics. The position from my hands or from my body to the handlebars is perfect. It's elegant. It's a timeless design. I think they've got it bang on. The shape of the frame, the shape of this beautiful fuel tank, the way the rear mudguard drops down low, and the twin exhausts, one on either side, with that Interceptor engine that looks just right. It's a beautiful, beautiful looking thing. I'll do the tap test. That's a metal mudguard on the front, and that's a metal mudguard on the rear, and even better than that, that is metal on the side panel. So they've spent money where the money's needed to be spent. On to what I see, just getting back to this before I forget, you can see a big step up in terms of quality here with the switchgear. They've put extra money into this area here. This is, I don't know the material, it feels almost like a brushed aluminium here on both sides. So that replaces what is often plastic looking switchgear surround, and that is a really, really nice touch. Here you can see the offset dials here, and very, very just stripped back, elegant look to it with these two chrome mirrors, one on either side. Nicely styled fuel gauge there with these beautiful Royal Enfield badges. That's a really quality feeling badge on the tank there, which adds to a premium feel of the bike. And onto the back of the bike, mudguard sweeps down low with, again, the most elegant rear light. This is the type of thing that often you have to pay for to get something like that. And just finishing it off at the bottom here, you have the two chunky tyres, front and rear, and of course the twin shocks, which for me on any cruiser is by far the most aesthetically pleasing element. But it's not all perfect. See, for a cruiser to be just right, the styling has to be spot on. There really cannot be any overlooked design elements to the bike. And there are a couple of areas that have been slightly overlooked on this bike. If we start here from where I'm looking, it's got the tripper navigation here on the right hand side, and it's got my speedo here offset slightly to the left, and it's also got the key that's slightly offset to the right hand side. Now for me, a cruiser has to be pure in its design, so it cannot be offset. For me, there has to be one single gauge, not even a twin gauge, one gauge bang in the middle here. If they're going to have the tripper navigation, it has to be built in, I would say, to this center section, and the key must be in line. One other point as well, the baby blue speedo going all the way around, for me that needs to be a white color or something like that. Baby blue on a cruiser for me personally doesn't quite work. Royal Enfield sticker here, again I'd get rid of it because it's not needed. It doesn't give it that stripped back cool cruiser look. These badges are all you need on a bike like that. Onto the front, and this is a lovely metal headlamps around here with that Royal Enfield badge right in the middle. That's a great looking thing. But the black surround part behind it, that's plastic. See, I know that this bike is to an extent built down to a budget, but the Royal Enfield Classic 350 has no design elements overlooked. Every single part on that bike is spot on. One other point here as well, the wiring here is slightly messy. I would like all of this to be cleaned up so you can see as little wiring as possible all around this area. And a final point, the engine. This bit of the engine here has been painted in silver. Again, for me, for a cruiser, it has to have a purity to it. This should be bare metal here. There shouldn't be any silver painted elements on the engine at all. I'm being picky here, but that's only because Royal Enfield have set the bar so high, I have to scrutinise as much as possible. It's good. It's very good. Handles better than it probably ought to for a 240 kilo cruiser bike. That surprised me. It really does handle very, very well. And the Interceptor engine has a rawness, a genuine old school feel that suits this kind of bike perfectly. Look, if you're being completely honest, V-twin engines will always rule the cruiser segment because V-twin engines have a very specific character that just works so well. They are the most characterful type of engine, but that takes nothing away from this. It works extremely well. I personally think this engine works slightly better in this bike than it does in the Interceptor. It really fits it perfectly. I also find it a slightly more pleasing bike to ride on a daily basis and use from day to day than the Interceptor. And the reason being, this doesn't specifically have a low centre of gravity per se, but the weight distribution on this bike feels slightly lower down than the Interceptor's, which is slightly top heavy. It's a really, really nice bike to live with, this. If I compare this to the classic 350, for example, now that for me is one of my favourite bikes that I have ever ridden. For me, that is quite close to motorcycling perfection. Everything that goes with it, the price, the character, the style, the charm, everything, it's heaven. This may not quite have that same level of jump on the bike and feel like you just want to skip in a field all day. It may not have that absolute level of charm, but what it does have is 85–90% of the classic 350 charm with such a considerable amount more power and usability that more than compensates for the very slight reduction in the charm that the classic 350 offers. The great thing about this, it's a cruiser that looks great, that's cool, that you can use on a daily basis with ease. Do you want to commute into the city? Well, this will be excellent. Do you want to strap on some panniers, put a backrest on it and do some two-up touring? Well, it can do it with ease. I would happily, tomorrow, in a heartbeat, head off down to the continent and do 2 weeks away on this bike. In fact, I can't think of too many other bikes I'd rather do it on. It's just so perfectly manageable. This size cruiser makes perfect sense. Mid-sized, 650cc, small and lithe enough to be able to use as a normal bike and not think you're having to figure out a specific place to park this 1800cc Colossus. It just makes perfect sense from day to day living. There are two very slight negatives I found while living with this bike on a daily basis. While the Tripper sat-nav works perfectly well, in essence, you download an app, you then set up where you want to go on the app, it hooks up to this and you head off. And it does work well. I've tested it in different situations and also away from areas with signal, and it works every time I've used it. The problem is, it drains your phone battery alarmingly quickly, meaning that even though you've got a sat-nav on your bike so you don't have to have extra wires, the reality is you still have to have your phone connected to the USB port because it will run out so quickly that when you get to your destination you're not going to have any battery left. And that brings me on to the second slight negative living with this bike, and that is the USB port. Because on the classic 350 it's tucked away under here, very easy to get to, plug in the wire and hook it up to your phone. It's perfect, makes perfect sense, it's a level-headed choice. On the Super Meteor, it's behind the side panel here, so you turn the key and you unclip it. That's all theoretically fine. That's where the USB port is. So the problem is I now have to unlock the side panel, plug in my USB wire here, close it up, put that on, hope I haven't pinched the wire underneath because there isn't that much space, push it closed and then turn it. And then I need a wire long enough to go from here all the way to the handlebars. And that, for one, is a 50-50 chance if you've got a wire long enough. And secondly, it looks messy because you've got a wire going from here to your pocket, or if you have a phone attached somewhere there. But don't let that put you off too much, because just look at it. It is the kind of bike that you can just stare at for 20 minutes at a time. I've been so excited for this bike, and it has not disappointed. It's a work of art. I love it. It's about 7 degrees outside, so we'll warm up with a coffee and do the competition. There are 2 bikes specifically that on paper are arch rivals of the Super Meteor. Number 1, Rebel 500. That is £6,400, 500cc, and it's got 46 horsepower, so exactly the same horsepower as the Super Meteor. Then we've got, bang in the middle of the 2, the Super Meteor. Then we've got, at the top end, the 650cc Kawasaki Vulcan. That is 60 horsepower, and it's £7,300. So we've got a £400 gap between the Honda and the Super Meteor, and a £500 gap between the Super Meteor and the Vulcan. In theory, these are incredibly closely matched, and it should be very difficult to figure out where to put your money. But to look at only the spec sheets for the cruiser segment is to completely overlook the most important factor in this market. And it's to overlook completely the reason why no bike so far has come close to taking the crown of Harley Davidson. And that's because out of these 3 bikes, the Honda, the Super Meteor and the Kawasaki, the Super Meteor is the only one with the old school look and charm. Now the interesting point comes from if we compare it to the Sportster, the outgoing Sportster, the 883, and to a lesser extent the 1200 as well with the Evo engines. Now the Royal Enfield Super Meteor can't compete in terms of character and aggression and rawness. Those Sportsters were from the mid segment of the market, the mid-size cruiser market. They were completely untouchable. Those V-twin engines were just so visceral. They took over everything. The second you fired them up, the second you rode them. So yes, the Royal Enfield can't compare from a rawness and aggression point of view, but what it does have over the Sportster, infinitely better handling, much better dynamics, and it will be noticeably cheaper to live with. There's one other bike I want to make a very soft mention to, and that's the Triumph Speedmaster. Yes, that's a lovely looking cruiser, but that comes in at £13,000. Now I'm a big fan of that bike, but it's very close to double the price of the Super Meteor. So the bottom line is, you really need to be spending 13 to 14,000 plus to be able to buy a genuinely cool, raw, old school cruiser. You're looking at Harley Davidsons, Indians, and to a slightly lesser extent the Speedmaster. Bottom line is that there is nothing even remotely close to the Super Meteor for that old school cruiser vibe. It sits in a market all by itself. Okay, let's wrap it up. While the Super Meteor may not quite get to the legendary status of the Evo Sportster, it's a thoroughly worthwhile addition to the Royal Enfield lineup. In fact, it's much, much more than that. This is quite difficult for me to say it because the Classic 350 is and has been one of my favourite bikes I've ever ridden. But I rate the Super Meteor so highly that it's now my pick from the range of the Royal Enfields. If I were to put my money where my mouth is and pick a Royal Enfield from the range, it would be this. That's how highly I rate it. Yes, it's good dynamically, the handling's good, the performance is spot on for what you need, but it's more than that. A good cruiser, a really good cruiser, needs to be able to take and turn an outstanding citizen into a tearaway. It has to have that feeling, it has to make me feel a certain way. This bike makes me want to dash my helmet into a bush, spark up a cigarette, and head off into the distance.